The Sumerians had a formal designation for things considered too dangerous for ordinary humans to interact with directly. They called it being made distant. They applied it to specific weapons, to specific locations, to specific categories of knowledge. At some point in Sumerian history, they applied it to a god, the oldest entity in their entire system, a being described in their earliest texts as existing before heaven and earth were separated, before the Anunnaki, before creation itself. The substance from which everything was assembled. Her name was Nammu, and the most organized religious administration in the ancient world made a formal, empire-wide decision that she was too dangerous for direct human contact. She disappeared from the active record. Temple hymns stopped addressing her. Oracle sessions stopped involving her. The administrative tablets documenting every other divine interaction, from grain allocations to military campaigns and sacred marriages, contain no mention of her after a certain point. She still appears in genealogies, Enki's mother, a historical footnote. But she is no longer someone you speak to. What she is, what the oldest texts describe before the silence came down, is an ocean. The primordial ocean that existed before the universe had a shape. The Sumerians said she was conscious. The specific word used for her awareness is the same vocabulary used throughout their administrative texts for active, decision-making intelligence. She was the material of creation. She was awake. When creation was complete, her own children, the gods who emerged from her, asked her to go deeper. Below the earth, below Enki's underground realm, into something the oldest texts call Engur, the deep below the deep. She went. And the civilization that watched her go built everything we consider the beginning of human history directly above where she descended. The texts describing this were written before the silence closed over this part of the tradition. The oldest ones are over 4,600 years old, found at the lowest excavation layers at Nippur and Eridu, the pre-Akkadian strata, before the religious system was reorganized. They say she is still there. If you want to subscribe, this is what I put out every week. Now let's go deeper. Most people who know Sumerian mythology know the main figures: Enlil, Enki, Inanna, An. Gods with administrative roles, with stories, with temples. Namu is none of that. She has one title, repeated every time she appears: the mother who gave birth to heaven and earth. That phrase sounds like standard mythology until you understand what it actually means in the Sumerian framework. The creation event was not a god building something from nothing. It was a separation. Heaven and earth were once a single, undivided thing. The gods, specifically Enlil, split them apart. Heaven went up, earth came down. But what were heaven and earth before that happened? They were Namu. The Sumerians described her as the substance that became heaven and earth. She did not craft the universe. She was the material from which it was assembled. And here is the part that gets set aside in modern translations. She was aware while this happened. The word applied to her state, appearing in the earliest Nippur hymns, is the same vocabulary used for a god who is actively paying attention. The material of creation was conscious. Here is why this matters more than it might seem at first. Every other entity in the Sumerian system has a beginning. Enlil was born, Enki was born, Inanna was born. Every god in the pantheon, however ancient, has an origin point described in the texts. Nammu has none. There is no text describing her creation, her emergence, her origin. She simply is. From the very first moment the Sumerian texts say anything exists at all, Namu is already there, already present, already aware. She is not a goddess who controls the ocean. She is the ocean, conscious before the world had any other shape. Then the gods emerged from her, organized the world, and she went below. The Sumerian cosmological structure has specific vertical layers: sky, surface, underground freshwater ocean, and below that, Engur. Namu returned to Engur, the deep below Enki's floor, and the record of what she did there stops being discussed. Nammu has no mythology. Every other significant Sumerian deity has stories, conflicts, romances, descents, betrayals. She has none. The gods who came from her fill thousands of tablets with their activity. She fills a genealogical reference. A being described as the material of creation does not simply fade from active religious practice without a decision being made. Enki is one of the most important figures in the Sumerian pantheon. He is the god of wisdom, of fresh water, of craftsmanship, and of the knowledge used to govern human civilization. His domain is the Abzu, an underground freshwater ocean described as a physical location with a floor, a ceiling, currents, and temperature. You can enter it, you can leave it. The Sumerians did not describe it as symbolic. Enki lives there and conducts business there. The ME, the operational laws governing civilization, are stored there. The tablets of destiny are managed from there. It is the administrative headquarters of the most knowledgeable god in the system. Here is what the texts do not say: that Enki built it. Every other domain in Sumerian cosmology is described as being constructed or organized by its occupant. The Abzu is consistently described using a Sumerian construction, meaning Enki occupied it, not that he created it. The infrastructure already existed when he arrived. The Sumerian term me was already stored there. The knowledge records were already present. Enki moved into a structure that was already built and took responsibility for what was already inside. In the pre-Akkadian texts, the oldest surviving layer, there is a consistent identification of whose domain the Abzu was before Enki arrived. It was Nammu's. Enki inherited his mother's house. She went deeper into Engur below his floor. The Sumerian civilization governing the surface for thousands of years was organized directly above that arrangement and said very little about it. This is not a small administrative oversight. Enki's identity is built on the Abzu. His power comes from what is stored there. Everything attributed to his wisdom, from metallurgy and agriculture to writing and law, is described as coming from the Abzu's records he did not originate. He manages a library he did not build, left by someone the civilization subsequently classified as off-limits to humanity. The implication sits there quietly. The most powerful god of knowledge in the oldest civilization on Earth derives his authority from materials left behind by an entity who is then formally designated as too dangerous to approach. Whatever Enki knows, he learned it from her domain. And whatever is in her domain, the Sumerians decided humanity should not try to reach. When a religious tradition decides to stop engaging with something, you usually see a gradual, uneven shift. Different cities preserve different practices. The transition takes generations and leaves inconsistencies. What happened with Namu does not look like that. In the early dynastic period texts, before the Akkadian Empire, Namu is present and addressed. She is petitioned. She functions in the religious economy of the civilization. In the Third period, the final great era of Sumerian political power, around 2100 to 2000 BCE, she is a genealogical reference, Enki's mother. That is her entire function. In the Akkadian period between those two, in the transitional texts, something unusual is visible. Scholars studying this material have noted that hymns from this period acknowledge Nammu and then immediately use distancing language. The phrasing acknowledges her existence while discouraging any attempt at direct engagement. One translation describes it as a warning written into a liturgical context, language that tells the reader the entity is real but should not be approached. They use their own formal category called made distant. The same designation applied to weapons considered too destructive for general use and to locations considered too volatile to access. Namu received the same classification. Think about what that coordination requires. Ur is in southern Mesopotamia. Nippur is further north. Lagash, Eridu, Kish, these are separate city-states with separate temple administrations, separate scribal traditions, and competing political interests. For all of them to apply the same designation to the same entity at roughly the same period of history, someone made a coordinated decision across the entire civilization and effectively at the same time. At a specific point in Sumerian history, the people running the oldest civilization on Earth decided that the entity below the Abzu should not be in direct contact with the human population living above it. They did not explain why in any surviving text. What survives is the silence itself and the administrative precision with which that silence was maintained. 80% of Earth's ocean floor remains unmapped at sufficient resolution to show what is there. That figure comes from NOAA's Ocean Exploration Program. We have better maps of Mars than we have of our own ocean floor. The technology to do this mapping exists. The will to use it on the majority of the ocean does not yet exist. What has been mapped has produced findings that continue to resist full explanation. In 1977, the research submersible Alvin descended to the Galapagos Rift and discovered hydrothermal vent ecosystems that should not exist by any prior understanding of biology. Tube worms, chemosynthetic bacteria, blind shrimp, entire food chains operating in complete darkness at crushing pressure, deriving energy from chemical reactions driven by heat from below the ocean floor. No sunlight, no photosynthesis, independent of every energy pathway supporting surface life. These organisms have no clear evolutionary relatives in shallow water. They appear in the deep record as a separate lineage. The Greenland shark, a deep ocean species, lives for over 400 years and reaches sexual maturity at around 150. The biology of the deep ocean is not operating on the same timeline as the surface. In 2023, NOAA's Deep Pacific Survey detected concentrated heat signatures on the ocean floor in locations inconsistent with tectonic models. Localized sources of heat in regions that should be geologically inactive. Moving heat sources at depths between 4 and 6 kilometers in places, the models say nothing should be generating that kind of energy. The published survey notes describe these features as not fully characterized and requiring further investigation. The Sumerians described a conscious entity in the domain below Enki's underground realm, in a region their text called Engur. They described it as the source of heat and movement in the primordial waters, before the Earth had a stable surface. The 2023 NOAA survey found heat sources on the deep Pacific floor that current geology cannot explain. I am not connecting those two things directly. I am noting that they exist in the same conversation. This fragment comes from Nippur, from the early dynastic 3A period, approximately 2600 BCE. It is among the oldest literary texts ever recovered. It predates the Akkadian Empire and predates the Ur-3 period. It was written before whatever decision was made to stop discussing Namu in active practice. The relevant section describes Namu in Engur after the gods asked her to go below. It says she is in the first water, in the place before the counting began, and she holds what was given to her before the separation. Before the counting began appears in Sumerian astronomical texts to describe the period before systematic sky observation was possible, before the calendar, before the cosmos had an organizational structure. It is the Sumerian phrase for before any of this existed in the form we understand it. What she holds has no clear referent in the text. Given by whom, and given before the separation, these questions are not answered. In 2600 BCE, when this was written, the explanation was apparently not necessary. Whoever was reading it already understood. The hymn has one more line. It says, the reason the gods do not descend below the Abzu, the reason Engur has no divine occupant except Namu, is because of what she holds. Her own children set a floor for themselves. They govern everything above it, she holds what she holds below it. And the boundary between those two things is precisely where Enki's floor sits. The gods who built civilization on the surface drew a line and did not cross it. Then the silence began. The administrative designation was applied. The text stopped. The civilization built above that silence produced the first writing system in human history, the first legal code, the first astronomical records, the first urban planning. All of it organized on top of a decision they made about what lives below them that humans were not supposed to know about. The hymn does not say, Namu is sleeping. There are two ways to read everything in this video. First, Namu was an early theological concept absorbed into the more complex Sumerian religious system that followed. Her disappearance from active practice is simply what religious evolution looks like over centuries. Second, the most administratively precise civilization in the ancient world formally classified the oldest entity in their cosmology as too dangerous for human contact. They built their entire civilization above the domain they assigned to her, left behind texts describing her as conscious and present, and enforced a silence about her that lasted for the remainder of their history. The deep ocean is 80% unmapped. The 2023 NOAA survey found heat sources in the deep Pacific that current geology cannot explain. The Sumerians had a word for what lives below the Abzu. They decided at some point that humans were not supposed to use it. Subscribe. There is more.